Einstein, one of the most influential physicists of the 20th century, described play as the highest form of research. Fast forward to the 21st century, and contemporary researchers have linked play to better cognitive skills, oral language development, self-regulation, pro-social skills, memory development, and academic performance. With evidence like that, you would think pretend play would be universally embraced by both parents and teachers alike. But with so many different theorists and philosophies, teachers worry that play-based curriculum might not adequately prepare children for the rigors of elementary school. Well, a growing body of science has a lot to add to the conversation. Just like you wouldn't want to go to a doctor that was using outdated medical practices, I'm going to share some of the most up-to-date science that should not only ease some of your concerns, but also the concerns of the families you serve. One of the reasons that many of us grapple with the importance of play is that we have outdated images of learning that include students seated at their desks, staring at chalkboards, and scribbling furiously on worksheets. Play, by contrast, allows for freedom of movement that is essential for learning and development. Now, I can't teach about the importance of play without playing. So we're going to pretend this balloon is a brain and use a permanent marker to draw the parts of the brain as I describe them, because your brain is better at remembering images than words. First, we're going to draw a structure called the cerebellum, which is right here behind the brain stem, in the back of the brain. Now, don't be afraid of the word. Honey, if you could say Beyonce, you could say cerebellum, okay? So, the principal task of the cerebellum is to coordinate movement and balance. But since it holds half of the brain's neurons, the name actually means small brain in Latin, it is massively interconnected with other areas in the brain that we use for learning. Biologically, people are wired to learn through interaction and involvement that characterizes play. The movement and enjoyment associated with play stimulates the release of chemicals in the brain that allow for stronger brain messages, regulate the flow of information to higher levels of the brain, and are associated with attention, processing, motivation, concentration, memory, and an elevated mood, which leads to a love of learning. Teachers always ask me, Angela, I love play-based learning, but aren't we setting children up for failure with play-based curriculums when they will need to sit and learn in kindergarten? As early childhood educators, you are not just preparing your students for the next grade, you're preparing them for life. Play-based learning builds better brains that are more capable of handling whatever challenges that lay awaiting them in the future. MRIs show the whole brain lights up in play. More specifically, the experience of play changes the connections of the neurons in the prefrontal cortex. I'm going to draw a site director here, or principal, in this front part of the brain, which represents the frontal lobe, because it supervises and manages cognitive controls such as goal-oriented attention, working memory, and impulse control. Those changes help wire up the brain's executive functioning, which helps children to better regulate emotions and make plans and problem solve. Now, I want you to take a minute and write down all the skills you want young children that you work with to learn from you this year on small Post-it notes. I'm sure some of the skills you wrote down were academic. And both teachers and parents often worry that allowing children to explore and discover may leave them unprepared academically. A common myth about play is that it's not academically rigorous, allowing children to do whatever they want. On the contrary, it creates a sounder base of knowledge that is more retainable. For example, when children are engaged in rewarding, purposeful play, those interactions release a chemical in the brain called dopamine. When dopamine is present during an event or experience, we remember it. The release of dopamine activates the reward centers, which are actually in the midbrain. These help children to stay focused on activities long enough to learn. So here is a simple loop that represents the brain's reward centers. This surge of dopamine prompts the reward structures to pay particular attention to the features of that experience so it can be repeated. This memory turns into motivation, driving children to repeat the experience. This repetition, in turn, triggers neurons to fire together. And honey, neurons that fire together wire together, establishing a secure neural network so the brain can reliably access the information over time. In other words, whatever children learn through play has more potential to become a permanent pathway. Unlike basic skills instruction, play is not limited to skills like literacy or math alone. Instead, skills are infused and learned within the context of interactions. In other words, neuroscience confirms that play is the vehicle from which skills are developed and the adhesive that makes them stick. So look back at those skills you wrote on those Post-it notes and stick them to your brains. What does research say about children that don't play? Well, studies of rats who have the same neurotransmitters and similar brain structure who were deprived of play had more immature patterns of neuronal connections in the prefrontal cortex. So, if you're still not convinced, go ahead and let the air out of your balloon, because that is what happens to brains without play. Is the tooth fairy real? How about the garbage man? These questions may seem trivial, but how young children answer them is an important indicator of cognitive development. Let parents know play is a cognitive mechanism, because if a child can't imagine a banana as a phone, how will they be able to imagine another person's perspective, the plans for the next big skyscraper, or solutions to abstract math problems? The ability to think abstractly is a huge mental leap forward, and play can make it happen. How should we teach parents when they won't even read your newsletters? I wrote down research and what children are learning in my interest areas. Create a bulletin board with bits of research, letting them know, bit by bit, the serious business of play. I'm going to end with another quote by one of the most gifted minds, Albert Einstein. Imagination is more important than knowledge, for knowledge is limited to all we know and understand, while imagination embraces the entire world and all there will ever be to know and understand.